Dehumanization begins with language. It begins when we stop calling other people humans, using their names, pronouns, identities with respect, and instead refer to them as animals or diseases, whatever we consider less than human. We see this in studies of fascism and totalitarianism throughout history, the use of rats, dogs, viruses to describe the undesirables of society, and unfortunately we see that language entering into our modern politic today. Language determines who we believe has the right to exist and how they deserve to exist. And language, when misused, can guide us to believe that certain people simply need to die. Which is why it disturbs me to hear Jesus refer to Herod as that fox. Even Jesus, God in humanity, was not able to escape the bitter reality of death we inflict upon one another with the words we choose to use. Don't get me wrong, I'm not calling Jesus a fascist. Jesus has every right to hate Herod. By this point in Jesus' ministry, he's built quite a crowd of followers by proclaiming and acting upon a radical divine love that is being poured freely upon human beings through the Holy Spirit, and calls all people to treat one another as full equals. Jesus is thoroughly disrupting the social order of Roman society by telling all people that they are dearly loved children of God. Meanwhile, Herod's position as the Roman appointed ruler of Galilee and Judea allows him to profit from the oppression of his own people. He lives with an extravagance that comes from the wealth he takes from the poor and rural Jewish communities. So when he learns of this Jewish rabbi gathering a following of people who believe that every human place is the dwelling place of God, of course he wants to kill Jesus. If Jesus calls him a fox, it's only because Herod has called him much, much worse in his campaign to have this emerging rival extinguished. But then there is the harmful language used by the Pharisees that's a little harder for us to detect. At first, it seems that the Pharisees, so often cast as the villains, are trying to protect Jesus, telling him to hide, to keep himself alive. The Pharisees here are not hyper-conservative and traditional. They seem receptive to Jesus' ideas, but they are resistant to the potentially destructive consequences of Jesus' message. They are centrists, moderates, people who believe that the only way to survive oppression is to keep your head down and act normal amidst abnormal times. They are not opposed to Jesus, but they are concerned that his activities will lead to his death and the death of their people and the death of their world. They are the reasonable. They are those of us, many of us, who just want things to return to normal and stay that way. And to make normal happen, they ask Jesus to disappear and be erased. And so we have our players in this language game, in this weird little passage, to determine who gets to be seen as worthy of life or death. We have Herod representing the state, committed to the project of systemic dehumanization, declaring that those of the wrong ethnicity or wrong class simply do not have the right to exist, or at least not prosper. Meanwhile, we have Jesus giving power to the people, declaring that all people have the right to exist filled with love, and yet he calls Herod a fox, engaging in the project of erasing someone's humanity for the sake of protecting the humanity of himself and the people he serves and saves. And then we have the Pharisees, who just want things to be normal, who just want everyone to find enough equality and sufficiency with things as they are to avoid further conflict. And we know who wins this language game. It's Jesus. Jesus always wins in the Gospels. Jesus is our guiding force, even as he uses harmful language. And I am highlighting this use of language because I want us to wrestle with the discomfort of Jesus' victory in this language game. Because Jesus' response to the Pharisees is an essential example of when God's message of radical love for all people clearly takes a side. And it is the side of all humanity. We need to wrestle with the fact that Jesus did not take Herod's desire to kill him and just shrug it off. He called Herod a fox, insulting him, calling out how Herod's power and privilege have stripped him of his humanity. Jesus does not choose the neutral option, does not move towards the center, does not make himself small. Jesus declares that the response to abnormal hatred and prejudice and violence is not normalcy, but abnormal love that is willing to be angry, that forgives but does not forget, that is willing to provoke death and trust in the promise of sacrifice and resurrection. Most of us likely spend most of our lives in the position of the Pharisees, wishing that we could put Jesus' more extreme edges back in the box of comfortable religion. We want Jesus to do miracles for us on the second day, tomorrow, the third day, but then hide away instead of providing liberation for those who need his message and miracles most. We crave a Messiah who will restore our status quo and allow us to live normal lives of prosperity, but we fear the Messiah who will mess up our lives, overturn our world, and reveal to us the truth that the normal world of the status quo is incompatible with God's love for a world that relies upon the erasure of human beings and the hiding and forced closeting of love is a world that refuses to embrace the liberation and equality and transformation that the Holy Spirit brings. For Jesus desires to gather us like a mother hen gathers her children together in equal life-giving love, but we choose to preserve the world of division, separation, and death because we are terrified that Jesus' path of love for the wrong people will provoke the powerful and lead to our deaths, along with those whom our society considers expendable. Hear the fullness of Jesus' message. It is not the rulers who kill the prophets. It is Jerusalem, the city, the whole people, who in their apathy, in their unwillingness to accept that loving all people as dearly loved children of God means risking everything to ensure that the inheritors of God's love are not erased, ignored, forgotten, forced to hide and die. And because we refuse to defend the eternal worth of all God's children, Jesus knows that his destination is the cross. I know something about erasure. I know something about being encouraged to hide and die. Recently, the federal government of America has decided that I do not exist because I know that I am non-binary, because I use they, them pronouns, because I believe in the promise that in God there is no longer male nor female, but all are a new creation. And the government has embarked on a project of removing all references to the terms that make me feel human and respected and loved. It is exhausting, but it's not what hurts me. What hurts me is the many people who ask me to hide myself, who ask me to contain my more transgressive properties and pass as normal. Pass as someone whom society deems worthy of respect, so that I don't make it hard for people to love me or have me around. And sadly, this has come especially from fellow Christians. It has come from comes up at almost any larger gathering of Christians, including pastors, where I am asked, along with my other queer siblings, to be quiet, to hide, to just be less visible, to get away from here because someone wants to kill you, and erase myself for my own good. But it's not hard, at least from my position, to see that the real concern is for the survival of the status quo, the return to normalcy. I expect oppression from the Herods of the world. What hurts is the erasure from the people who discern that the love of God only applies to the people whom it is easy and unrisky to love. But I can also sympathize with this position, because I also know something about erasing other people. Back before I came out, I had a friend in seminary, that's pastor school, who transitioned to using they/them pronouns, a non-binary identity, before me, and they changed their name. And I was scared. I was scared about putting them in danger. I was scared about the danger of being around them. I was scared about what would happen if I respected their identity. And that fear made it hard for me to remember to use their true name and their pronouns. And one day, I messed up. We were eating lunch together with friends, and I used their dead name. And everyone froze, and I saw my friend die as they realized that someone whom they trusted to love them was still dead to the oppression of the status quo. But here's the good news. Grace exists. It is real, and it can transform every situation of death. I apologized to this friend, and we reconciled. From their courage, I learned how to truly respect them and uplift them. From their forgiveness, I learned how to respect myself. From their grace, I found the courage to become myself. From our shared situation of death, resurrection abounded for both of us, and love found new life, and all we had to do was let our devotion to normalcy die. We are living in abnormal times, when the people who claim to rule not just our society but our language, the way that we think about one another, are trying to change our way of speaking, thinking, and feeling to give us permission to hate and train us to see an expanding number of people as unworthy of love and respect, whose destiny is just to die. And there are many who say that we must choose our battles to restore the world to normalcy by erasing those who are simply too dangerous to keep around, those who are too dangerous to love and lift up. And do not be deceived by these arguments, because Jesus' grace does not hide. Jesus' grace is abnormal. Jesus' grace gets angry and furious when people's humanity is taken away, when people are forced to hide for who they are. Jesus' grace reveals how we dehumanize ourselves whenever we allow our neighbor to be dehumanized. Jesus' grace responds to the threat of death by continuing to love and forgive and heal tomorrow, the next day, and the third day, and all the way onto the cross. Because Jesus' grace is willing to die to lift up all people as dearly loved children of God. And Jesus' grace knows that we will fail, that we will erase others, and that we will allow ourselves to be erased. And that is okay, because Jesus' grace tells us that we are already forgiven. But Jesus' grace does call us out, telling us that there are promises more numerous than the stars in the sky when we accept that God's love lives in all people. I have allowed myself to be erased even within this community. And I don't say that as an accusation. I say that as a way of taking responsibility for my own treatment of myself. And I feel Jesus' grace calling me out, calling me a fox for the ways that I have let myself be forced into the closet of normalcy. My name is Bergen Eickhoff. I am non-binary and I use they/them pronouns, and I will correct you if you use other pronouns for me. Please receive those corrections as grace calling you into the love of God that lifts up the right of all human beings to live with safety, equality, and love. Because we are going to need to let the many sins of our society die before we are all ready to proclaim, "Blessed is the one who comes in the name of God," whenever we see another human being. To allow our language to be guided by the radical love that lifts up, protects, and emboldens the eternal worth of every living thing. Even Jesus found it challenging to recognize some humans, like Herod, as a beloved child of God, but Jesus followed the path of love for all, the calling out of grace all the way to the cross, and unleashed a love that raises life from every death. So know that if you are dying, or if the people you love are being erased, or if you are caught doing the erasing, know this truth: you are a dearly loved child of God who has every right to exist in the fullness of who God has created you to be. But do not be afraid when God's grace calls you out of normalcy in these abnormal times, to die in the name of love so that you may rise into a love that lives beyond language, the love that is not just for you, but for the promise of life more abundant than every star and solar system in the universe. All it will take is a refusal to hide and a trust in Jesus' grace that is understood as righteousness, to expand your love until you come upon your cross.